Picture this. You're sitting in a dark room, hands bound behind your back, facing three men who believe they hold all the power. They've spent the last 72 hours trying to break you, using every psychological trick in the book. They think they know who you are. Just another victim who will eventually crack under pressure. But they have no idea they've just made the biggest mistake of their lives. What they don't know is that the woman sitting across from them has survived hell training that would break most people in hours. She's been through situations where giving up meant death, where mental toughness wasn't just encouraged. It was the difference between life and death. This is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, a decorated Navy SEAL who found herself in the worst possible situation, facing enemies who had no clue they were about to learn what real strength looks like. For 72 hours, they threw everything they had at her. For 72 hours, they believed they were winning. They were wrong. What happened next would become legend in military circles. A story whispered in training camps about what happens when you underestimate the power of someone who's been forged in the crucible of elite military training. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about the moment predators realized they had chosen the wrong prey. Get ready for a journey that will show you what real courage looks like when everything is on the line. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the airplane at Reagan National Airport, her civilian clothes feeling strange after months in military gear. The humidity of Washington, D.C. hit her immediately, but it was nothing compared to the desert heat she'd endured during her last deployment. She pulled her baseball cap lower over her eyes, a habit that came from years of keeping a low profile in hostile territory. At 32, Sarah looked like any other traveler making her way through the busy airport. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a comfortable t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance screamed elite warrior. That was exactly how she liked it. The most dangerous people she'd learned were often the ones you'd never suspect. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Emma. "Can't wait to see you. It's been too long." Sarah smiled, something she hadn't done much of lately. Emma lived in a small town outside Virginia Beach, working as a nurse and raising her 8-year-old daughter Lily. It was the normal life Sarah sometimes wondered if she'd ever have, but seeing her family always reminded her why she did what she did. The drive to Emma's house should have taken 2 hours, but Sarah decided to take the scenic route through some back roads she remembered from childhood visits. She needed time to decompress, to shift from the warrior mindset that had kept her alive overseas back to being just Sarah, the aunt who brought cool presents and told carefully edited stories about her travels. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself on a lonely stretch of highway that cut through dense woods. She'd always loved this part of Virginia, where civilization seemed to fade away and nature took over. The radio played softly, some country station Emma had programmed. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt her shoulders relax. That's when she noticed the car that had been behind her for the last 20 miles. At first it didn't trigger any alarms. Plenty of people use this route, but something about the way it maintained the exact same distance, never trying to pass despite several opportunities, made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. In her line of work, paranoia wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival tool. Sarah tested her suspicion by slowing down at a scenic overlook. The car behind her slowed too, but didn't pull in. Instead, it continued past, and she got a good look at it. A dark sedan with tinted windows and 2 men in the front seats. The passenger turned to look at her as they passed, and Sarah felt that familiar chill she got when something was very wrong. She waited 5 minutes before pulling back onto the road, but sure enough, the sedan was parked at a gas station just a mile ahead. As she drove past, it pulled out behind her again. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She activated the GPS on her phone and began looking for the nearest police station. But before she could find one, the sedan accelerated and pulled alongside her. The passenger window rolled down, and Sarah saw the barrel of a gun pointing at her. The man behind it was shouting something, gesturing for her to pull over. For a split second, Sarah considered flooring the accelerator and trying to outrun them. Her car was fast and she knew these roads. But then she saw the third car coming from the opposite direction, blocking her path. And behind her, a fourth vehicle had appeared. They'd been planning this, waiting for the perfect spot, where no other cars would see what happened. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could try to ram through the roadblock, but at these speeds she'd likely end up wrapped around a tree. She could try to get to her service weapon in the glove compartment, but not while driving and surrounded. Her best bet was to comply for now and wait for an opportunity. She pulled over to the shoulder, her hands visible on the steering wheel. The sedan stopped behind her, and 2 men got out. They moved like professionals, one covering the other as they approached her car. The first man was tall and lean, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent a lot of time indoors. The second was shorter and broader, with arms covered in tattoos that Sarah recognized as prison ink. Out of the car, the tall one said, his voice calm and controlled. Keep your hands where I can see them. Sarah complied, stepping out slowly with her hands raised. Is there a problem, officers? She asked, knowing they weren't police but hoping to gauge their reaction. The tattooed man laughed. Officers? That's good, real good. He moved closer, and Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath, mixed with cigarettes. You know why we're here, Sarah. The fact that they knew her name sent ice through her veins. This wasn't a random highway robbery. Someone had given them information, told them where she'd be. But who? And why? I think you have me confused with someone else, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. My name's not Sarah. The tall man pulled out a photograph and held it up next to her face. It was her military ID photo from 2 years ago. Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL Team 6. 32 years old, from Minneapolis originally. Currently on leave after your last deployment to Syria. Should I continue? Sarah's blood ran cold. This information wasn't supposed to exist in civilian databases. Someone with serious connections had given them her file. The question was why someone wanted a Navy SEAL kidnapped, and what they planned to do with her. What do you want? She asked directly. Right now, we want you to get in our car, the tattooed man said, pulling out flex cuffs. You can do it conscious or unconscious. Your choice. Sarah looked around quickly. They were on an isolated stretch of road with thick forest on both sides. Even if she screamed, no one would hear her. The smart play was to go along for now and wait for a better opportunity. In Seri training, they taught her that the first few hours of captivity were crucial. Stay alert, gather information, and wait for your moment. Conscious, she said, extending her hands. As the plastic zip ties tightened around her wrists, Sarah began cataloging everything she could about her captors. The tall one seemed to be in charge, checking his watch and giving quiet instructions to the others. The tattooed man was the muscle, probably ex-military based on how he carried himself. She counted at least 4 men total, which meant this was a serious operation with serious backing. They led her to a black van that had pulled up behind the sedan. The back was set up like a mobile command center with communication equipment and what looked like medical supplies. One man sat at a laptop typing rapidly. He looked up as they brought Sarah in. Package secured, he said into a headset. ETA to location is 40 minutes. Sarah was pushed into a seat and secured with additional restraints. The van was windowless in the back, so she couldn't see where they were taking her. But she could feel when they turned off the highway onto what felt like a dirt road based on the bumping and vibration. Where are you taking me? She asked. The man at the laptop looked up. He was younger than the others, maybe late 20s, with the soft look of someone who spent his time behind computers rather than in the field. Somewhere private, he said. Somewhere we can talk without interruption. Talk about what? Information, the tall man said from the front of the van. You have it, we need it. Simple as that. Sarah's mind raced. What information could they possibly want from her? Her last mission had been classified, but it was a standard extraction operation. Nothing that would warrant this level of effort. Unless someone thought she knew more than she actually did. I don't know what you think I have access to, she said. My security clearance isn't that high. The tattooed man laughed again. Right. A SEAL Team 6 operator with a low security clearance. Try again. Sarah realized they'd done their homework, but they might have made incorrect assumptions about what she knew. That could work in her favor, but only if she played it right. Give them too little, and they'd escalate their methods. Give them too much, and she might reveal something that actually was classified. The van began to slow, and Sarah felt them turning onto what sounded like a gravel driveway. Through the front windshield, she could see they were deep in the woods now, with no sign of civilization. They pulled up to what looked like an old hunting cabin, isolated and dark, perfect for what they had planned. As they dragged her out of the van, Sarah got her first good look at the location. The cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside, with what looked like recent renovations. This wasn't a random hideout. Someone had prepared this place specifically for interrogations. Welcome to your home for the next few days, the tall man said, pushing her toward the front door. I hope you're comfortable talking because we have all the time in the world. Sarah said nothing, but her mind was already working. These men thought they had captured a valuable intelligence asset. What they'd actually done was kidnap someone trained to resist interrogation, escape from captivity, and survive in hostile environments. The real question was how long it would take them to realize their mistake. As they pushed her through the door into the dimly lit cabin, Sarah began the most important mission of her life, staying alive long enough to turn the tables on her captors. She had no weapons, no backup, and no way to communicate with the outside world. But she had something her captors couldn't possibly understand: the absolute certainty that she would not break, no matter what they did to her. And eventually, that certainty would become their worst nightmare. The door slammed shut behind her, and Sarah Mitchell disappeared into a situation that would test every skill she'd learned in a decade of elite military service. The next 72 hours would either destroy her or forge her into something even stronger. Her captors were about to find out which one it would be. The interior of the cabin was nothing like what Sarah had expected. From the outside, it looked like a rustic hunting lodge, but inside, someone had turned it into a sophisticated interrogation facility. The main room had been stripped of furniture, except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor in the center. High-powered lights hung from the ceiling, currently dimmed but clearly designed to be blinding when needed. Along one wall, Sarah noticed a series of monitors and recording equipment. This wasn't just about getting information from her. They planned to document whatever they did. That told her this operation had multiple layers, with people above her, captors who wanted proof of results. "Impressive setup," Sarah said, looking around casually. "You guys go to a lot of trouble for a conversation." The tall man, who seemed to be the leader, gestured for her to sit in the metal chair. "We find that the right environment helps people focus on what's important," he said. His voice carried the hint of an accent Sarah couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe Russian. As they secured her to the chair with additional restraints, Sarah continued her assessment. The cabin had been soundproofed. She could see the special padding around the windows and door. No one would hear anything that happened here, which meant screaming for help would be pointless. But it also meant her captors could talk freely, possibly revealing information she could use. The computer specialist from the van had set up a laptop on a small table to her left. He was connecting cables to the recording equipment, preparing to document whatever was about to happen. The tattooed man stood by the door, checking his weapon. The fourth man, who she'd barely seen during the kidnapping, emerged from what looked like a kitchen area carrying a briefcase. "Let's start with something simple," the leader said, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. "Your last mission in Syria. Tell me about Operation Desert Rose." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Operation Desert Rose had been classified at the highest levels. The fact that they knew the code name meant they had access to intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. Either there was a mole somewhere in the command structure, or these people had resources that went far beyond what she had initially assumed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. "I've never heard of any Operation Desert Rose." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, we're going to be spending a lot of time together. It would be better for both of us if you didn't insult my intelligence. We know you were part of the team that extracted Dr. Hassan Mahmoud from Aleppo 3 months ago." The mention of Dr. Mahmoud's name hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she didn't let it show on her face. Mahmoud was a Syrian chemical weapons expert who had been secretly working with US intelligence. His extraction had been so classified that even the mission briefing had been verbal only. The fact that these men knew about him meant someone very high up in the intelligence community was feeding them information. "I've never been to Aleppo," Sarah lied smoothly. "You can check my service record." The leader nodded to the man with the briefcase, who opened it to reveal several syringes and small bottles. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Sarah. The easy way involves you telling us what we want to know. The hard way involves chemicals that will make you tell us everything you know, including things you've probably forgotten." Sarah recognized the threat. Truth serums weren't reliable for detailed information, but they could break down psychological barriers and make someone more susceptible to interrogation techniques. Combined with sleep deprivation and other methods, they could eventually break even trained resistance. "Even if I knew what you were talking about," she said. "What makes you think I'd tell you? You kidnapped me, threatened me, and now you're talking about drugging me. Not exactly building trust here." The tattooed man laughed from his position by the door. "Trust? Lady, we don't need your trust, we just need your information." "Victor," the leader said sharply, "be quiet." He turned back to Sarah. "My associate is enthusiastic, but he's not wrong. We don't need you to like us, Sarah. We just need you to understand that cooperation will make this experience much more pleasant for everyone involved." So the tattooed man was named Victor, and he took orders from the leader. Sarah filed that information away, along with everything else she was learning about her captor's dynamic. The leader was clearly in charge, but Victor seemed to have a different agenda, more focused on violence than information gathering.
What I understand, Sarah said, is that you've made a serious mistake.
When I don't show up at my sister's house, people are going to start looking for me. And when they find out what you've done, you're going to wish you'd never been born. The leader reached into his pocket and pulled out Sarah's phone. You mean this message you sent to Emma saying you decided to take a detour and visit some old friends in North Carolina? That you'd be a few days late, but not to worry. Sarah's heart sank. They'd used her phone to cover their tracks, which meant they'd had time to plan this operation in detail. Emma wouldn't report her missing for at least a week, possibly longer, if they sent follow-up messages. By then, whatever these people wanted from her would probably be over. Very thorough, she admitted. But you're still making a mistake. I'm not the person you think I am. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell graduated top of her class from Naval Academy, selected for SEAL training at age 24, served with distinction in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Specialized in hostage rescue and high-value target extraction. Currently attached to DEVGR Guru, what most people call SEAL Team 6. The leader read from a file he'd pulled from somewhere. Does that sound familiar? Sarah said nothing. Everything he'd said was accurate, which meant they had access to her complete military record. This wasn't a fishing expedition. They knew exactly who they'd captured and what they wanted from her. The problem, the leader continued, is that people in your position are trained to resist interrogation. They teach you to hold out for 24 to 48 hours, long enough for rescue to arrive or for the information to become useless. But we're not interested in tactical information that goes stale quickly. He stood up and began pacing in front of her chair. What we want is strategic information. Long-term intelligence networks, operational procedures, classified technologies. The kind of information that stays valuable for years. Sarah began to understand the scope of what she was facing. These weren't random criminals or even terrorists looking for a quick intelligence score. This was an organized espionage operation, probably state-sponsored, designed to extract high-level military secrets. She was looking at days or weeks of systematic interrogation, not hours. And you think torturing a Navy SEAL is going to get you that information? She asked. My clearance isn't high enough to know the kind of things you're talking about. Maybe not, the leader admitted. But you know people who do have that clearance. You know procedures, locations, communication methods. And most importantly, you know how to access secure systems. Now, Sarah began to see the real plan. They didn't just want information from her. They wanted to use her knowledge and access to penetrate deeper into U.S. military intelligence networks. Her biometric data, her knowledge of security procedures, her personal relationships with other operators, all of that could be weaponized against her own country. That's not going to happen, she said firmly. I'd die before I'd help you compromise American intelligence operations. Victor laughed again from the corner. Die? Who said anything about dying? There are lots of ways to break someone without killing them. Some of them are quite creative. The leader shot Victor another warning look, but didn't contradict him. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Sarah. But you should know that we have extensive experience in persuasion techniques. Very few people can hold out indefinitely. Sarah knew he was right. Everyone had a breaking point, even highly trained special operations personnel. The key was to hold out long enough for circumstances to change, or to find an opportunity to escape or turn the tables. But first, she needed to survive the initial phases of their interrogation. Before we begin in earnest, the leader said, I want you to understand something. This facility is completely isolated. No one knows you're here, and no one is looking for you yet. The nearest neighbor is 12 miles away, and the local sheriff's department has 4 officers who cover 100 square miles of territory. Even if you somehow manage to escape this building, you're in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. He sat back down across from her. But more importantly, you should know that we've done this before. Successfully. We know how to break people like you, and we know how to keep them alive and functional while we do it. The question is whether you want to go through days of unnecessary suffering, or if you'd prefer to start cooperating now. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I guess we'll find out what I'm made of. The leader sighed. I was hoping you'd be more reasonable. He nodded to the man with the briefcase, who began preparing one of the syringes. This is a mild sedative mixed with a compound that breaks down psychological barriers. It won't force you to tell the truth, but it will make you more susceptible to questioning. As the man approached with the syringe, Sarah felt the first real spike of fear since her capture. Not fear of pain or death, she'd faced both before, but fear of losing control. of being chemically compromised to the point where she might reveal information that could get other people killed. Wait, she said, trying to buy time to think. Yes. If I'm going to be here for days, I need to use the bathroom. And I need water. Basic human necessities. The leader considered this. Victor, take her to the facilities. But keep her restrained and don't leave her alone for even a second. As Victor freed her from the chair but kept her hands bound, Sarah began to map out the layout of the cabin. Information was survival, and every detail about her environment could be useful later. The bathroom was small and windowless, but she noticed that the door had a simple lock that could probably be picked with the right tools. More importantly, she saw that the cabin's electrical system ran through exposed conduits along the walls. If she could find a way to access those, she might be able to cut power to the surveillance equipment and create an opportunity for escape. When Victor brought her back to the main room, the leader was reviewing something on the laptop with the computer specialist. They'd been analyzing her reactions, probably looking for signs of deception or weakness. Feeling better? The leader asked as they secured her to the chair again. Much thanks. Sarah's tone was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than her impending torture. Good. Now, let's try a different approach. Instead of the syringe, the leader pulled out a tablet and showed her a photograph. It was a picture of her sister Emma and niece Lily, taken recently outside Emma's house. Sarah's blood turned to ice. If you hurt them, we have no intention of hurting them, the leader said calmly. As long as you cooperate. But you should understand that your choices here don't just affect you. It was a classic interrogation technique, threatening family members to break down the subject's resistance. Sarah had been trained to expect it, but seeing that photograph of Lily's innocent face still hit her like a physical blow. Emma and Lily have nothing to do with this, Sarah said, working to keep her voice steady. Of course they don't. We have people watching them right now. One phone call from me, and they disappeared just like you did. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This changed everything. She could endure whatever they did to her, but she couldn't risk her family. These people had just shown her that they were willing to target innocent civilians, which meant they had no moral boundaries at all. When she opened her eyes, the leader was watching her carefully. I can see you're beginning to understand the situation, he said. Your training taught you to resist for yourself, but it didn't prepare you for this, did it? Sarah said nothing, but her mind was racing. She needed to find a way to protect Emma and Lily while also protecting the classified information these people wanted. It was an impossible balance, but she had to try. Here's what's going to happen, the leader continued. We're going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them, truthfully and completely. If you lie to us, or if you refuse to answer, we make a phone call. Do you understand? Sarah understood perfectly. They'd just turned her family into weapons against her own country. The next 72 hours weren't just about her survival anymore. They were about finding a way to save everyone she cared about without betraying everything she'd sworn to protect. The real interrogation was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was about to discover just how strong she really was. The first 24 hours passed in a blur of questions, lies, and calculated resistance. Sarah quickly developed a strategy. Give them information that was already compromised or outdated, mixed with enough truth to seem cooperative while protecting anything truly classified. It was a dangerous game, but she'd been trained for exactly this scenario. The leader, who finally revealed his name as Alexei, proved to be a skilled interrogator. He alternated between threats and reasonable conversation, trying to establish rapport while maintaining psychological pressure. The computer specialist, who went by Marcus, monitored her vital signs and stress responses through sensors they'd attached to her arms and chest. Victor remained the wild card. While Alexei preferred psychological manipulation, Victor clearly favored more direct methods. Sarah could see the tension between them growing as the hours passed without significant results. You're being very clever, Alexei said during what must have been their 15th session. Sarah had lost track of time in the windowless room, but her body told her it was sometime in the early morning hours. Giving us just enough information to seem cooperative, but nothing that's actually useful. Sarah tested her restraints for the 100th time. The zip ties had been replaced with metal shackles after she'd managed to partially work free of the plastic during a bathroom break. I'm telling you what I know. I can't give you information I don't have. The problem, Alexei continued, is that we know you're lying. Your stress responses spike every time we ask about certain topics. Marcus here is very good at reading the data. Marcus looked up from his laptop. Heart rate, skin conductance, micro-expressions, they all tell a story. And your story is that you know much more than you're telling us. Sarah had expected this. Modern interrogation combined traditional psychological techniques with sophisticated biometric monitoring. Her SARI training had covered basic countermeasures, but these people had equipment that was probably beyond anything the military used for training. Maybe my stress responses spike because you've kidnapped me and threatened my family, she said. Innocent people tend to get nervous in these situations. Victor, who had been pacing near the back of the room, suddenly slammed his fist on the table. Enough of this bullshit. We've been dancing around for hours, and she's still playing games with us. Victor, we discussed this, Alexei said calmly. No, you discussed it. I listened. Victor moved closer to Sarah's chair, and she could see the barely controlled violence in his eyes. I know a dozen ways to make her talk without leaving permanent damage. Give me 30 minutes with her. That's not how we do things, Alexei replied. But Sarah heard uncertainty in his voice. The team was beginning to fracture under the pressure of her resistance. How we do things isn't working, Victor shot back. Look at her. She's been sitting there for hours giving us nothing useful. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking and our employers are getting impatient. This was the first mention Sarah had heard of employers, confirming her suspicion that these men were working for someone else. Probably a foreign intelligence service, given the resources and planning that had gone into her capture. What's the deadline? She asked, genuinely curious. Alexei and Victor exchanged glances, and Sarah realized she'd just learned something important. There was a timeline, which meant this operation had specific objectives that needed to be completed by a certain date. Clever, Alexei said, but not clever enough. You don't need to know about deadlines. You just need to start providing useful information. But Sarah was already working through the implications. If there was a deadline, it meant her captors were under pressure from above. Pressure made people make mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. She just had to survive long enough to exploit them. I think, Victor said, pulling a knife from his belt, that our guest needs some motivation. The blade was military style, serrated on one edge and razor-sharp on the other. Victor tested it against his thumb, drawing a small drop of blood. You know what this is? It's what we use for field amputations when medical facilities aren't available. Very effective for removing fingers, toes, other small parts that people tend to be attached to. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but forced herself to remain calm. Torture doesn't work. It produces false information and unreliable intelligence. Even your own people must know that. Torture is such an ugly word, Victor said, moving the knife closer to her face. I prefer enhanced persuasion, and it works just fine when applied correctly. Alexei stood up. Victor put the knife away. We're not there yet. When will we be there? Victor demanded. When our employers decide we've failed? When they send in a cleanup crew to eliminate all the evidence, including us? The mention of a cleanup crew sent another chill through Sarah. These people were clearly expendable to whoever was running the operation, which made them more dangerous. Desperate people did desperate things. The knife stays put away until I say otherwise, Alexei said firmly. We follow the protocol. Victor sheathed the blade reluctantly, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. Your choice. But when this goes sideways, remember that I tried to do things efficiently. The fourth man, who had remained mostly silent during the interrogations, finally spoke up. His name was Dmitri, and unlike the others, he seemed more like an intelligence professional than a soldier or thug. Perhaps we should try a different approach entirely. What do you have in mind? Alexei asked. Dmitri moved to stand in front of Sarah. Miss Mitchell, you're a patriot. You've served your country with distinction, risked your life multiple times in service to American interests. I respect that. Sarah said nothing, but she could already see where this was heading. The problem is that your country doesn't always respect that service in return. How many of your fellow operators have been abandoned when operations went wrong? How many have been disavowed when political considerations outweighed loyalty to the people in the field? It was a sophisticated approach, appealed to her sense of betrayal by the system she served. Sarah had seen good people abandoned when missions became politically inconvenient. She'd watched friends struggle with PTSD, while bureaucrats worried about budget allocations. But she'd also seen the alternative in other countries, where people lived without freedom or hope. Nice try, she said. But I didn't sign up to serve politicians. I signed up to serve the Constitution and the American people. Big difference. Is it? Dmitri asked. When those same American people send you into harm's way and then forget about you when you come home damaged. When the Constitution gets interpreted to justify surveillance on citizens and interventions in foreign countries that serve corporate interests more than national security. Sarah had to admit he was good. He'd obviously studied her psychological profile and identified potential pressure points. But she'd also been inoculated against this kind of manipulation through years of training and experience. Even if everything you're saying is true, she replied, it doesn't justify helping foreign intelligence services steal American secrets. Whatever problems my country has, we solve them ourselves. Dmitri nodded approvingly. Admirable. Misguided, but admirable. Unfortunately, admiration doesn't change our situation. Which brings us back to my original suggestion, Victor interjected, his hand moving to his knife again. No, Alexei said sharply. We try the enhanced interrogation protocol first. Sarah felt a chill. Enhanced interrogation was a euphemism for techniques that walked the line between questioning and torture. Sleep deprivation, temperature manipulation, stress positions, sensory overload methods designed to break down psychological resistance without causing obvious physical harm. Strip her, Alexei ordered. Victor and Dmitri moved toward her, and Sarah realized they were about to escalate to a new level of psychological warfare. Being forced into vulnerability was a standard technique for breaking down mental defenses, especially effective against people trained to project strength and control. This is unnecessary, she said, trying to maintain her composure. I've already told you everything I know about my last mission. No, Marcus said from his position at the laptop. You haven't. Your stress indicators show significant spikes whenever we mention Dr. Mahmoud's research, the extraction route through Turkey, and the safe house locations. You're hiding something important about all three topics. Sarah cursed mentally. She'd been careful about controlling her visible reactions, but apparently not careful enough about her physiological responses. The combination of fatigue and stress was making it harder to maintain perfect control. As they removed her clothes and replaced them with a thin hospital gown, Sarah forced herself to focus on survival. Humiliation was a weapon, but only if she let it affect her mentally. She'd been through worse during Sari training, and she'd survived that. Better, Alexei said once they'd secured her back in the chair. Now you look less like a dangerous special forces operator and more like what you really are, a prisoner completely under our control. They adjusted the temperature in the room until it was uncomfortably cold, then positioned the bright lights to shine directly into her eyes. Sarah could feel the psychological pressure building, but she also noticed something else. The team's coordination was starting to break down. Victor was becoming increasingly aggressive and impatient. Marcus seemed nervous about the escalation. Dmitri appeared to disapprove of the crude methods. And Alexei was clearly feeling pressure from above to produce results. Let's try once more, Alexei said. Dr. Mahmoud was working on something specific when you extracted him from Syria. Something beyond chemical weapons research. Tell me what it was. Sarah closed her eyes, partly to block out the harsh lights and partly to think. Dr. Mahmoud had indeed been working on something classified, something that went beyond conventional chemical weapons. But revealing that information would compromise ongoing operations and potentially get other intelligence assets killed. Chemical weapons, she said simply. That's all I was briefed on. Liar, Victor snarled. We know he was developing binary agents that could be deployed through commercial delivery systems. Weapons that could kill thousands of people without anyone knowing they'd been attacked until it was too late. Sarah's blood ran cold. If Victor knew about the binary agents, then their intelligence was even better than she'd feared. Dr. Mahmoud had been working on a new class of chemical weapons that could be disguised as harmless commercial products until combined in specific ways. It was the kind of technology that could revolutionize terrorism. But she couldn't admit to knowing about it. Even under these circumstances, some secrets were too dangerous to reveal. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Victor pulled his knife again, this time ignoring Alexei's protests. Maybe you'll remember when you're missing a few fingers. Victor, stop, Alexei commanded. But Victor was beyond listening to orders. He grabbed Sarah's left hand and pressed the knife against her index finger. Last chance, Navy girl. Tell us about the binary agents, or start learning to count to 9. Sarah looked directly into Victor's eyes and saw madness there. He was going to cut off her finger whether she talked or not, because he wanted to hurt someone, and she was the only target available. Do it, she said calmly. Victor hesitated, clearly not expecting that response. Go ahead, Sarah continued. Cut off my finger. See how much classified information a screaming, traumatized prisoner gives you compared to someone you're having a conversation with. You're bluffing, Victor said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? I've been shot, stabbed, blown up, and tortured by experts. You think one finger is going to break me? All you'll do is prove that you're an amateur who doesn't understand how interrogation actually works. Dmitri stepped forward. She's right, Victor. Pain without context is just abuse. It doesn't produce reliable intelligence. Then what do you suggest? Victor demanded, still holding the knife. Time, Dmitri said simply. Time, isolation, and psychological pressure. We break down her sense of self gradually, make her dependent on us for basic needs, create a situation where cooperation seems like the only logical choice. Sarah recognized the strategy. It was essentially Stockholm Syndrome by design, a long-term approach that gradually shifted the prisoners' loyalty toward their captors. It was more effective than torture, but it took much longer. We don't have time for a long-term approach, Alexei said. Our deadline is in 48 hours. Then we'd better hope she becomes more cooperative quickly, Dmitri replied. As Victor finally put away his knife, Sarah realized she'd won a small victory. She'd faced down the immediate threat of physical torture and bought herself more time. But she'd also learned that she only had 48 hours before something significant happened. The question was whether she could find a way to escape or turn the tables before that deadline arrived. Because whatever these people had planned for 48 hours from now, she was certain it wouldn't end well for her or for anyone else. The real test was just beginning. 48 hours stretched into what felt like weeks under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sarah's internal clock had been deliberately disrupted by her captors, who alternated periods of interrogation with brief moments of rest at random intervals. Sleep deprivation was a powerful tool for breaking down psychological defenses, and they were using it expertly. But they had made one crucial mistake. In their effort to disorient her, they'd also disrupted their own routines. Sarah could see the strain beginning to show in her captor's behavior. Marcus was drinking coffee constantly and making small errors with his equipment. Dmitri had developed a nervous tic of checking his watch every few minutes. Even Alexei, the consummate professional, was showing signs of fatigue. Victor was the worst affected. His barely controlled aggression had evolved into open hostility, not just toward Sarah but toward his teammates as well. She'd watched him get into increasingly heated arguments with Alexei about tactics and timing. She's playing us, Victor had said during their last confrontation, loud enough for Sarah to hear from her chair. She's trained to resist exactly what we're doing. We need to break the rules. The rules exist for a reason, Alexei had replied coldly. We follow the protocol. The protocol is failing. Sarah filed away every piece of information she could gather about the team's dynamics. Victor was becoming unstable, which made him dangerous but also potentially useful. Unstable people made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. During her latest bathroom break, Sarah had managed to work one of the metal brackets holding the toilet paper dispenser partially loose. It wasn't much, but the sharp edge could potentially be used as a weapon or tool if she could find the right moment to grab it. She'd also been studying the electrical system more carefully. The cabin's power came from a generator she could hear running outside, but there was also a battery backup system for the critical equipment. If she could disrupt both, she might be able to create enough chaos to escape. Feeling more talkative today? Alexei asked as they brought her back from the bathroom. It was a question he'd been asking regularly, part of his attempt to establish a routine that would make her more psychologically dependent on their interactions. Actually, yes, Sarah said, surprising him. I've been thinking about what Dmitri said yesterday, about being abandoned by the system. Alexei's eyes sharpened with interest. Oh? There was something that happened during the extraction, Sarah continued, weaving truth with misdirection, something that made me question whether the people giving orders really cared about the people following them.
She could see she had their attention now.
Even Victor stopped his pacing to listen. Doctor, Mahmoud wasn't just researching binary weapons, she said. He was also documenting American involvement in chemical weapons development during the early 2000s. Weapons that were tested on soldiers without their knowledge. It was a carefully constructed lie based on real controversies about military experiments on service members. Sarah needed to give them something that seemed valuable while actually being worthless. What kind of documentation? Marcus asked from his laptop. Video recordings, research notes, correspondence with Pentagon officials. He was keeping it as insurance, in case the Americans decided he was too dangerous to keep alive. Alexei leaned forward. Where is this documentation now? That's the problem, Sarah said with perfectly feigned bitterness. When we extracted him, my commanding officer ordered me to destroy all of Mahmoud's personal files. Said they were too politically sensitive to bring back to the States. But you didn't destroy them, Dmitri said. It wasn't a question. Sarah met his gaze. Would you? Evidence of war crimes committed by your own government? I copied the files before destroying the originals. Where? Victor demanded. Safe deposit box in Virginia Beach, under a false name. It was completely fabricated, but it was exactly the kind of thing an intelligence service would want to get their hands on. Compromising information about American war crimes would be worth millions on the black market and could be used for political leverage for years. Alexei stood up and walked to the corner of the room where he couldn't be overheard. Sarah could see him talking rapidly into a satellite phone, probably checking with his superiors about how to proceed. This was the moment when her deception would either work or get her killed. When Alexei returned, his expression was unreadable. My employers are very interested in this information, he said. They want proof before we proceed. What kind of proof? Sarah asked. Access codes for the safe deposit box. Bank information, something that proves you're telling the truth. Sarah had anticipated this request. The access codes are memorized, but I wrote down the bank routing information and box number. It's in my apartment, hidden in a book. Which book? Moby Dick. First edition. On the shelf in my bedroom. The information is written in pencil on page 394. Another lie, but specific enough to be believable. Sarah was gambling that they wouldn't be able to verify this information before the deadline, whatever that was. Victor, Alexei said, take Dmitri and go to her apartment. Find that book and bring back whatever information is in it. Victor's face twisted with frustration. You're sending me on some wild goose chase while she sits here playing games with us? I'm sending you to verify information that could be worth millions of dollars to our employers, Alexei replied coldly. Do you have a problem following orders?
The tension between the two men was thick enough to cut with a knife.
Sarah could see that the team was finally starting to fracture under the pressure of her resistance and their approaching deadline. Fine, Victor snarled. But when we get back and find out she's been lying, I get to do things my way. As Victor and Dmitri left the cabin, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She'd just reduced her guard from 4 men to 2, which significantly improved her odds of escape. But she'd also potentially sent dangerous men to her apartment, where they might find evidence of her real life that could be used against her. Smart move, Marcus said from his laptop once the others were gone. Dividing your captors, creating conflict in the team. Classic resistance technique. Sarah looked at him with surprise. You sound like you've studied this. I have a PhD in psychology, Marcus replied. Specialized in interrogation resistance and breaking techniques. I know exactly what you're trying to do. Then you know it's working, Sarah said. Marcus smiled. Yes, it is. Victor is becoming increasingly unstable. Dmitri disagrees with Alexei's methods, and the deadline pressure is making everyone sloppy. You're very good at exploiting human weaknesses. But you're still here, Sarah pointed out. I'm here because I'm being paid very well to be here, Marcus said. But I'm not emotionally invested in breaking you the way the others are. To me, this is just an interesting case study. Alexei had been listening to their conversation with growing irritation. Marcus, focus on your equipment. I don't want her psychological games affecting you too. Too late, Sarah said quietly, and she could see from Marcus's expression that she was right. Her resistance had earned his professional respect, which made him less likely to actively work against her. With only 2 guards remaining and the team's cohesion deteriorating, Sarah began to seriously plan her escape attempt. The window of opportunity was narrow, but it might be the only chance she got.
You know, Alexei said, settling into his chair across from her, in a different situation, I think I might have enjoyed knowing you.
You're remarkably resilient. Thanks, Sarah said. In a different situation, I probably would have killed you by now. Alexei laughed. I believe that. But here's the thing. Even if you escape, even if you somehow manage to get out of this cabin and past our perimeter, what then? Your apartment is compromised. Your sister's house is being watched. We know everything about your life, your friends, your routines. Where would you go? It was a valid point, and one that Sarah had been struggling with. Even if she escaped immediate captivity, she'd be a fugitive with limited resources and extensive enemy surveillance. But she'd dealt with worse situations in hostile countries, and she'd survived by being smarter and more ruthless than her enemies. I guess we'll find out, she said. As if responding to her words, the power in the cabin suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, but in that brief moment of total darkness, Sarah heard something that made her heart race. Gunfire. Automatic weapons, coming from outside the cabin. Either Victor and Dmitri had run into serious trouble, or someone else had found the cabin. Either way, the situation had just become much more complicated. "Marcus," Alexei hissed, "what's happening with the perimeter sensors?" "I'm checking," Marcus replied, frantically typing on his laptop as it switched to battery power. Multiple contacts approaching from the north and east, military movement patterns. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Somehow, someone had tracked her to this location, but she also felt a chill of fear. If this was a rescue operation, it meant there would be a firefight, and she was chained to a chair in the middle of the potential battlefield. "How is that possible?" Alexei demanded. "We had complete communications security. No one should have been able to track us here. Unless," Sarah said quietly, "you weren't as smart as you thought you were." The truth was, she had no idea how anyone could have found her. But she wasn't about to let her captors know that. The important thing was that someone was coming, and her 72 hours of resistance were about to pay off, or get her killed in the crossfire. As the sound of gunfire grew closer, Sarah realized that the next few minutes would determine whether she lived or died. But for the first time since her capture, she felt like she might actually have a chance to survive this nightmare. The question was whether her rescuers would reach her before her captors decided she was too dangerous to keep alive. The gunfire outside intensified, and Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of sniper rifles, mixed with the rapid bursts of assault weapons. Whatever force was attacking the cabin, they were using professional military tactics and equipment, but whether they were there to rescue her or eliminate all witnesses remained to be seen. Alexei grabbed his sidearm and moved to the window, carefully peering through the reinforced glass. "Marcus, can you raise the others on radio?" "Negative," Marcus replied, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "Victor and Dmitri went dark about 10 minutes ago. Either they're in a communications dead zone or they're dead," Sarah finished for him. Alexei spun around to face her, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "What did you do? How did you signal for help?" "I didn't do anything," Sarah said honestly. "I've been chained to this chair for 3 days. But maybe your operation wasn't as airtight as you thought." The truth was beginning to dawn on her as she thought about the timing. Victor and Dmitri had left for her apartment just before the attack began. If someone had been monitoring her living situation, waiting for the right moment to strike, the departure of half her guards would have been the perfect opportunity. "The safe deposit box story," Marcus said suddenly. "It was bait." Sarah smiled, for the first time since her capture. "Took you long enough to figure that out, Doctor?" "You magnificent bitch," Alexei said, but there was grudging admiration in his voice.
"You played us perfectly." "Not perfectly,"
Sarah replied. "If I'd been perfect, I never would have been captured in the first place." A massive explosion shook the cabin, and Sarah could see through the windows that one of the outbuildings was now engulfed in flames. The attackers weren't just trying to rescue her. They were systematically destroying the entire facility. "We need to move," Alexei said. "Marcus, grab the hard drives and destroy anything we can't take with us." "What about her?" Marcus asked, nodding towards Sarah. Alexei hesitated for a moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his options. She was valuable as a hostage, but she was also a liability that would slow them down. In his position, she would probably choose to eliminate the liability. "She comes with us," Alexei decided. "She's our only bargaining chip now." As Alexei freed her from the chair, keeping his gun pressed against her head, Sarah felt the metal bracket she'd loosened in the bathroom pressing against her hip, where she'd managed to conceal it earlier.
It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something.
"Where are we going?" she asked as they prepared to leave the cabin. "There's an emergency exit through the basement," Alexei replied. "A tunnel that leads to a secondary vehicle position about half a mile away." Sarah filed that information away. A tunnel meant they'd be underground and potentially out of sight of the attacking force. If she was going to make a move, it would have to be in that tunnel where Alexei couldn't call for backup and where the confined space would work to her advantage. Marcus finished destroying the computer equipment and grabbed a backpack full of hard drives and documents. "Ready?" he said. They moved toward a hidden door behind what Sarah had thought was a storage closet. The basement beyond was larger than she'd expected, clearly designed as a fallback position with supplies and equipment stored along the walls. "Who do you think is attacking us?" Marcus asked as they moved through the basement. "Could be military, could be intelligence," Alexei replied. "Doesn't matter. What matters is getting out alive." The tunnel entrance was concealed behind another false wall. As they entered the narrow passageway, Sarah could hear the sounds of battle growing more distant behind them. The attacking force was still engaged with whatever defensive measures had been left at the cabin. The tunnel was just wide enough for 2 people, which meant Alexei had to move in front of her, with Marcus bringing up the rear. It wasn't ideal for what Sarah was planning, but it would have to do. They'd been walking for about 10 minutes when Sarah heard something that changed everything. Victor's voice, coming from ahead of them in the tunnel. "Alexei, thank God you made it out." "Victor? How did you get here?" Alexei called back. "Dimitri's dead. We walked into an ambush at the apartment. I barely made it out, came back through the tunnel when I heard the attack starting." Sarah felt ice in her veins. If Victor was alive and in the tunnel ahead of them, her window for escape was rapidly closing. But something about his voice didn't sound right. There was a strain to it, a tension that suggested he wasn't alone. "Are you injured?" Alexei asked as they approached the sound of Victor's voice. "Just minor wounds," Victor replied. "But we need to move fast. The attackers have thermal imaging. They'll find the tunnel soon." As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, Sarah saw Victor standing about 20 feet ahead. He was indeed wounded, with blood on his shirt and a makeshift bandage around his left arm. But he was also holding his gun in a way that made Sarah's training instincts scream a warning. "Victor," Alexei said, relief evident in his voice. "Report. How many attackers? What kind of equipment?" "Maybe a dozen special operations personnel," Victor replied, but his eyes never left Sarah. "Professional gear, coordinated tactics. They knew exactly where to hit us."
"How is that possible?" Marcus asked from behind Sarah.
"Simple," Victor said, his voice turning cold. "We have a traitor in the team." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah could feel the tension ratcheting up as the 3 men tried to process what Victor was suggesting. "That's impossible," Alexei said. "We've all worked together before. We're all vetted." "Are we?" Victor asked. "Because someone fed information to the attackers. Someone told them exactly when and where to strike. Someone who knew our procedures and our escape routes." Sarah realized what was happening. Victor wasn't just paranoid, he was right. But he'd identified the wrong traitor. "It wasn't one of us," she said quietly. All 3 men looked at her. "The attack timing was too perfect," Sarah continued. "They waited until exactly the right moment when your team was divided and your defenses were down. Someone's been feeding them information, but it's not someone in this tunnel." "Then who?" Marcus demanded. "Your employers," Sarah said. "Think about it. You've been under pressure to produce results by a specific deadline. When it became clear you weren't going to deliver, they decided to cut their losses. The silence that followed was deafening." Sarah could see the realization dawning on their faces as they processed what she was saying.
"A cleanup operation," Alexei said slowly.
"Eliminate all evidence, including the operatives." "But we have value," Marcus protested. "We know things they need." "You know things that could expose them," Sarah corrected. "The difference is crucial." Victor's face twisted with rage, but it was no longer directed at Sarah.
"Those bastards!"
"We deliver results for years, and this is how they repay us? The question now," Sarah said, "is what you're going to do about it." It was a calculated risk. She was betting that the team's anger at being betrayed would override their training and discipline. Angry people made poor decisions, and poor decisions created opportunities. "What are you suggesting?" Alexei asked. "I'm suggesting that your only chance of survival is to cooperate with the people who are currently shooting at you," Sarah said, "because I guarantee they're not here to eliminate witnesses. They're here to rescue me and capture you for interrogation." "And why would we trust you?" Victor asked. "Because right now, I'm the only person in this tunnel who isn't marked for death by your employers," Sarah replied. "I'm also the only one who might be able to convince the attacking force not to kill you on sight." Sarah could see them weighing their options. They could continue with their escape plan and hope to evade the attacking force, but Sarah was right about the thermal imaging. They'd be tracked down eventually. Or they could take a chance on surrendering to people who might keep them alive for intelligence purposes. "What guarantee do we have that your people won't just execute us?" Marcus asked. "None," Sarah said honestly. "But I can guarantee that your employers will have you killed if you escape. They've already written you off as acceptable losses." The sound of pursuit was getting closer now. Sarah could hear voices and equipment moving through the tunnel system behind them. "Decide fast," she said. "In about 5 minutes, this decision gets made for you." Alexei looked at his teammates, then back at Sarah. In his eyes, she could see the moment when years of training and loyalty cracked under the weight of betrayal and survival instinct. "What do you want us to do?" he asked. Sarah felt a surge of triumph, but kept her expression neutral. "First, put your weapons down. Second, when my people get here, let me do the talking. Third, Be prepared to tell them everything you know about your employers and their operations. One by one, the three men laid their weapons on the ground. Victor was the last to comply, his face twisted with bitter resentment at how completely his world had fallen apart. For what it's worth, Sarah said as they waited for the rescue team to arrive, you're all competent operators. In a different situation, I might have respected your professionalism. In a different situation, Alexei replied, we wouldn't have been trying to torture information out of you. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They'd spent 3 days trying to break Sarah's resistance, only to find themselves dependent on her protection when their own allies betrayed them. When the first rescue team member rounded the corner, weapon raised and ready for combat, Sarah called out clearly, friendly. Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Navy. I have 3 surrendering prisoners who have valuable intelligence. The operator lowered his weapon slightly, but kept it ready. Mitchell, Jesus, we've been looking for you for 2 days. Are you injured? Bruised and tired, but functional, Sarah replied. These 3 have information about a foreign intelligence operation on U.S. soil. They're willing to cooperate in exchange for protection. As additional team members filled the tunnel, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that her 72 hours of hell were over. She'd survived not just the physical and psychological torture, but she'd also managed to turn her captors against their own handlers. But as they secured the prisoners and began the process of extraction, Sarah realized that her ordeal had taught her something important about herself. She'd always known she was tough, but she'd never been tested at this level before. Now she knew with absolute certainty that there was no situation so dire, no pressure so intense, that she couldn't find a way to survive and eventually prevail. Her captors had set out to break a Navy SEAL. Instead, they'd forged something even stronger. And that was a lesson they'd remember for the rest of their lives, however long or short those might be. The war against terror had many fronts, and Sarah Mitchell had just won a decisive battle on one of the most personal of them all. She'd proven that some people simply couldn't be broken, no matter what was done to them. And sometimes that was enough to change everything.